I will introduce my guest, Paul Zak. Paul is the founding director of the Center of Neuroeconomic Studies and professor of economic psychology and management at Claremont Graduate University. He is the founder and chief immersion officer of Immersion Neuroscience, the first neuroscience as a service platform. Paul's 2 decades of research have taken him from the Pentagon to Fortune 50 ballrooms in the rainforests of Papua New Guinea. All of this in a quest to understand the neuroscience of human connection, human happiness, and effective teamwork. And by the way, he doesn't say it in his bio, but he has a pretty spectacular TED Talk on oxytocin, trust, and morality. You can give that a look. It's one you won't want to miss. His research on oxytocin and relationships has earned him the nickname Dr. Love. He's all about adding love to the world, which is why we love him. So thank you so much, Paul. Oh, I think we need to unmute you. There you go.
To unmute. What a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. And you've set the bar so high now, so it's really got to be good. So.
Well, I've seen you perform, so I have no doubt that we're going to have a great conversation today. So before we dive into our conversation, will you, Paul, tell everyone who's joined us today how they can participate in this Creating Experiences That Matter experience that we're co-creating today?
Right. So we sent out an email to folks that invited you to download our app if you have a smartwatch, a supported smartwatch, and we'll actually collect some data and see how effective this Podinar is. If y'all want to do that, if you've already downloaded it, you need to push join on your watch. It's a little blue, I don't know if you can see mine. It's a little blue, it's a little blue brain icon, and it should say join if you've already downloaded the app. If you haven't downloaded the app, you could probably do it while we're talking, but then you would lose our beautiful conversation. So you've done that in advance. Then you're good to go, and we'll look at some of that data later. And I'm a big believer in, science is about, sorry, I'm gonna use one bad word, science is about getting rid of bullshit. So, we're gonna actually do that on ourselves and make sure that we're actually creating a great experience for everyone here.
Great. So Paul Adrian just joined and said that, or maybe it's Andrea just joined and said she'd like the name of the app again.
It's called Immersion Neuro. Let's see. We have so many. I've actually forgotten. It might be called Sense. You have to go to the link. So if you look at your email, you've got a link to it.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah's putting it in the chat box.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
We have lots of different apps, so I've forgotten.
No, thanks, Andrea. So, and also we sent out an email at 2 o'clock Eastern yesterday with the subject title, would you like to participate tomorrow in our live demonstration? So what Paul was talking about is this topic of creating experiences that matter isn't just surely conceptual. What the invitation to join us in demonstrating it is that we can help determine live right now how much this Podinar matters. And it means any of you who have a smartwatch. I don't have a smartwatch. You have to have a smartwatch to participate, but any of you who have a smartwatch, then downloading the app and we'll look at your data. It's completely anonymized, and that'll give a sense for how engaged we are. Okay. So with that, can you tell us, Paul, what you mean by immersion neuroscience?
Right. So over 20 years of research in my lab, starting with, as Allison said, the work we did to understand this neurochemical oxytocin and what causes the brain to make it, what behavioral effects it has. We wanted to know if experiences from movies to video clips to video conferences would it cause the brain to make oxytocin? And if so, how valuable is that experience? And value is complicated, right? I could ask you, but we know that it's very difficult to assess this kind of valuation decisions, right? So like liking is a very poor predictor of what people actually do. I might like to lose 10 pounds this year, but if I really lost 10 pounds, that's objectively observable. So we designed experiments where we had people do something after we gave them an experience. And originally we were doing blood draws. So we do before and after blood draws. And we would use, for example, a public service announcement. And then we said, okay, let's see if the oxytocin actually caused you to do something. Then we can actually see that it's not just background noise in your brain. Number one. And number two, then we can assess how much you value that experience. So like we did a lot of PSAs for childhood cancer from St. Jude Children's Hospital. So if you donated St. Jude's, your brain must have valued this. And we found that oxytocin was not enough, that you had to have a second component, which was you've got to really attend to the information. So if you're asleep, it's not going to be a great experience. So if you're attending to it and you get the oxytocin response, which tells us that it's emotionally resonant, your brain really is engaged by this, it cares about it. When those things co-occur, I've called that state immersion. So this is kind of like why we cry at movies, which is a very weird human behavior, right? You're cognitively intact, you know where you are, you know this is a fictional story, you know those are paid actors, and yet at the end of the movie when the boy gets the girl, people cry. But that's really interesting. So that's kind of a transportation of yourself into that experience. And that's what immersion is neurologically. It's that mechanism or set of mechanisms in the brain that cause us to transport ourselves into an experience. And here's the punchline. When we do that, we remember the experience, we enjoy the experience, we can recall the information in that experience weeks later. So looks like somehow, just by dint of hard work, we identified how the brain values an experience. And if we can measure that, then we can go back and create more valuable experiences.
Okay, so if I can tease that out a little bit, what I think I'm hearing you say is that you're defining immersion as attention and the production of oxytocin. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I would say attention and emotional resonance. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and emotional resonance is measured by oxytocin release?
Yeah, it's that sharing of emotion. So you might call that empathy, but because we also look at sort of static, non-human interactions, empathy is a bit of an odd word to use for a movie, but it's really how much I'm in sync with you. So here's kind of a cool thing else, and this may be the one useful piece of neuroscience I'll share today, which is if we're having a great conversation or if we're working together, our brains and our physiologies begin to coordinate. So immersion is really this interaction between people. And again, if it's a movie, it's between me and the characters in the movie, but it's still the same mechanism of the brain. So if I can create an immersive experience, then we're working effectively as a team. Then we're in sync in a very real neurologic way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So immersion and experiences that matter we're using those terms synonymously here. Is that right?
Yeah, they run together. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So in all this work you've done in learning about immersive experiences, meaning it's an immersive experience in which there's attention and human connection, what have you learned that creates attention and creates human connection?
That's a big question. Let's narrow it maybe to the training space. So it's all public information. One of our longest term clients is Accenture, and Accenture produces $1 billion of training annually for their employees. Awesome company, right? That's amazing. They call this future-proofing employees. And so they have this whole a group of learning architects based out of St. Charles, Illinois, and they spend a lot of time creating training, tweaking it, making it better, but it never has a metric other than that post-event survey that, we talk about the hotel and the food, and it's hard to say, like, these 10 minutes of this experience, not so good or fabulous. So they've been using our technology for about 2 years. And what they found was that what I call the 20-20-20 rule. So no one should present for more than 20 minutes. If it's really valuable, if it's immersive, if I'm really putting in metabolic energy to acquire this information or have this experience, then 20 minutes is about as long as you can sustain attention. So you were very nice to promote my TED Talk. So TED Talks are 18 minutes maximum, right? So somehow Chris Anderson at TED sort of knew that if it's really powerful, that's about enough. So Accenture does 20 minutes presentation and then 20 minutes of an active task for the learners, and then 20 minutes of debrief. And something we've also seen in the Accenture data, again, they produce films on this. I mean, so this is all public information, so none of this is, I'm not sharing out of school here. But they've also found, one of the learning architects at Accenture said this so beautifully. He said, Maslow's hierarchy always wins. So by that, they found that the breaks are really important. If you're, especially when you're in the Zoom world, but even in person, if you're tired, if you need to use the bathroom, if you're thirsty, you know, that takes bandwidth out of your brain. And so it's just harder to really stay fully engaged. So they've actually put shorter, more intensive sessions and longer breaks. And that's sort of counter to what, you know, we think, hey, we're adults, we can work through 8 hours of this information. But again, neurologically, as you'll see when we look at the immersion data, it's always kind of a sine wave. If I'm deeply immersed in an experience, it's really metabolically costly. And then I need to take a little neural breath. I need to actually just, neurons get fatigued like muscles do. So I need to have a little break, and then I can kind of re-immerse. And so I think having that data allows you to really kind of go back and audit what you've done before. Say, if you did a video of that experience, you can just overlay the data, but also think about how we have the most impact on humans in terms of how we train them, how we engage with them, so that the experience we're creating has long-term effects.
So the 2020 learning you got from Accenture, was that based on in-person training or virtual? And if it was based on in-person, do you think it would be the same or different for virtual?
Great question. That was based on in-person. And what they've told me recently for virtual is much more like 10 minutes of presentation.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
Before we do something. No, but you know, we rehearse this in advance. We have a plan. The Allison has a plan. And, you know, I think taking those breaks for questions, mixing it up. We even see that for longer presentations. For all of us probably do presentations. If you're doing an hour-long keynote or something, mix up the media. I show videos, I show, you know, or use the stage, right? Move around, mix things up, go in the back of the room. I've done talks in the back of the room just because I want to, you know, mess people's brains up. So, you know, really use that space fully, all the tools that you have. So
I'm thinking about how I apply this. You know, we're a training company. We have, you know, a 12-week long, well, virtual, a 12-week long course. We meet for 90 minutes. And I'm just thinking, and I imagine many of the people who are joining us today also do some form of training or workshopping or whatever online. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if I had to do like 20-20-20 or like 10-10 or like something like that, I'm like, it'd have to be a 24-week workshop. You know, do you have an idea of like what this means in terms of how we really need to like completely reimagine training?
Yeah, I think the beautiful thing about online is it scales, right? So we can reach a lot more people. So I think it's really breaking things into smaller chunks, and then as much as possible being more participatory. So when we're in person, we always know we need to do participatory tasks. And I think it takes a lot of creativity to think about how to do that in the online world. But for example, breakout rooms are a great way to do that in Zoom. And so really put that in and allow attendees to voice what they're doing. So I think it's more, it's like a flipped classroom kind of thing as much as possible.
Okay, well, given that, and we've been going on by my clock 16 minutes now, we should do something.
You know what? I'll give you two suggestions, which I've seen done recently. I'm sorry if I cut you off, Allison.
No.
One is I did a keynote in Brazil yesterday via Zoom. And instead of doing, for a group, I had done an hour keynote for last year. And Brazilians love me for some reason. We can talk about that on the side. And so instead of doing me talking, they did an interview style. So they had both me and the interviewer on screen, and we basically did an interview. So it's much more back and forth. So I thought that was a great idea. The second is something Accenture has done now is after about 15 to 20 minutes, take a physical break and actually have people exercise. Let's stand up, let's move around, go, just get some blood flowing. It seemed to work really well. I did an Accenture webinar about maybe 7 weeks ago. And I was like, oh, okay, we're going to move around for 3 minutes, but 3 minutes ain't bad. So you're the boss of us, so you can decide if we want to do that or not.
Yeah, but, how about we just take maybe 60 seconds and move, and then we'll see how it goes, 60. What do you think?
All right, I love it.
Maybe head and shoulders. I can do head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Right.
Sure, let's do it. I'm standing.
Head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes. Head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes. Eyes and ears and a mouth and a nose. I think I got that wrong. Head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes. That's kind of good.
And yeah. And we also touched on something else, which we're going to talk about, Allison's in our schedule, which is vulnerability, right? So when in person, you know, we're sitting close to each other, you know, shoulder to shoulder, but we don't have that kind of physical connection. But now we just do something stupidly goofy together, and it's a little bit embarrassing. It's wonderful to be vulnerable. So we've actually found in laboratory experiments that individuals who are vulnerable, who open up, oh, you get a big oxytocin release. We really like these people. So yeah, you know, be a little silly. It's okay. We get it. You know, bring your dog in or your kid, or I think it's so lovely when you're doing a Zoom and someone's, you know, child walks into the screen and, hey, how are you? You know, it's all good.
That's awesome. Well, how about we stop for a second and take questions from our audience. If you would like to ask a question, feel free and raise your hand, raise your virtual hand. Let me see how I can see you. If you'd like, you can find your virtual hand under the participants button. I will ask a couple of questions that were offered in advance while we watch for the virtual hands. Wayne asked the question, what sections of the brain are most active, like when we're, you know, immersed?
Right. So it's a great question. So first of all those false images you've seen from functional MRI are false. So those are just, you know, changes in activity. So the whole brain's working all the time. So somehow that question, what's most active, you know, is not quite correct. But the whole brain's working all the time. There's no hard line between cognition and emotion. If you read Danny Kahneman's book, you know, the system 1 and system 2 is a myth. It's your whole brain. It's like your heart's organized. It's, you know, it's an organ that works all together. Having said that, what we found is that the neurochemicals associated with immersion are primarily dopamine and oxytocin. So dopamine, particularly binding in the prefrontal cortex. So attention is very active in the prefrontal cortex, and oxytocin comes from the brainstem. So what does that mean in application? It means I've got to get enough kind of executive focus. So I, you know, get rid of distractions so I can really focus on this experience. So that's the necessary condition to be immersed. But the sufficient condition is, again, now I'm going to use a second bad word with apologies, but it's sort of a bad word. As one of our clients said, it's the give a shit measure. So this emotional resonance is, you got to make me care about this. So learning, again, is metabolically costly. It's hard to do. So you've got to capture my attention, number one. But most of the variation in immersion is due to this emotional resonance, how much I care second to second about this. And if you can get me to care about it, then I'm going to get this oxytocin and dopamine response where I'm kind of all in, and that's what you want. And again, all in is not it's not a 0-1 variable. It's, you know, varying. But once you, again, for me as a nerdy scientist, once you have a measurement tool, then you can really ask interesting questions. How do I reverse engineer this process so that I can have maximum impact on the people I'm interacting with? So thank you for that question. Awesome.
Yeah. So Ellen, I see you've got a question. And you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Cool.
I put it in the chat too. I'm just wondering if you can then rinse and repeat. So if you've done your 20-20-20, so you've finished a debrief, can you then, you know, add more content, another 20, and do the whole thing again?
I think I would put a break in. I would put a 10-minute break and then come back. I think it is wash, rinse, and repeat. So yeah, and other people have asked, like, what if I, you know, do the same content for 10 different audiences? Like, do I have to mix it up? Actually, no. So even when we looked at people watching the same content online, if it's immersive content, you'll enjoy it again. This is like the TV show or movie that you've seen 10 times, right? We still enjoy it. We still become immersed in it. And sometimes it's more enjoyable the second or third time through.
Sarah, any questions we should take from the chat box?
Adrian is asking, what's the impact on focus of attention and impact on coaching conversation in comparison with training activity?
I don't have a good answer for that. I'm not, I could get you the neuroscience, but I'm not I don't know the differences enough. You guys maybe could tell me. Maybe
Okay.
you could
And
inform me more about the difference between coaching and training.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would think that coaching's much more, or training's much more passive and impersonal, and coaching is much more active and personal. So that, I think my sense is that there'd be more attention and more connection in coaching, but that's just what's coming up for me. Yeah. I see Peter has a question. How does this work with, I lost the question.
Oh, I see. People who trigger anger and fear in others to gain followership. Oh, such a good question. In fact, we're going to talk about this in our third half hour. Yeah, so the precursor for building that connection, that trust in this other person, particularly in the one-to-one coaching, thank you, Allison, for explaining that to me, is what we call psychological safety. So I've got to be comfortable around this person. I've got to build that connection. Fear is a really great short-term motivator. It's a very poor long-term motivator. So the term of art in psychology for repeated unexpected fear responses, the behavioral response is called learned helplessness. So if I'm a rat in a cage, I'm getting shocked randomly, I just give up. And humans do the same thing. So I've had the yelling boss, and maybe you guys have too. I hate the yelling boss. I think it's first of all, I think this guy, it's always a guy, sorry. This guy cannot emotionally regulate. Like, dude, I'm a high performer. Like, I will get this stuff done. Don't yell at me, right? Have some control of your life, number one. And then number two, right, that yelling generates a defense of a fear response. So again, if I have a fear response, I'm going to react quickly, but it narrows my focus. I'm looking at just getting through the next 10 minutes, not about the bigger picture, not about our OKRs, not about the organization's goals. So conversely, with oxytocin, this kind of connection, empathy, getting me to care about something, there's good evidence that system so the fear system downregulates. The oxytocin system upregulates. If I say, look, I really care about you. I want you to be successful in everything we do. And I think for me, when I've done, I wouldn't call myself a coach, but when I've done, working with our organizations, with clients, I always think about those individuals as being successful as human beings before they're successful as employees. Right? You've got to, if your personal life sucks, but you're the best, salesperson, at some point you're going to blow up, right? That's the way people work. So really think about the whole person and think about them being successful. I'm sure you guys do the same thing. And so if I show you that care, if I'm coaching you, if I show you that I really am interested in you as a human being, then we build a strong connection, and then I can help move you to places you want to go. So it's a little like therapy, right? You've got to kind of trust that therapist, or a romantic relationship. You build that trust with that person, and they may take you to places that are a little uncomfortable, but you can get used to it if you're there. So the last point, sorry for the long answer, but it's such an important question. If I'm doing training, one-on-many training, and I don't establish psychological safety, you can think of psychological safety as kind of the inverse of anxiety. So if I'm anxious, I'm taking a lot of bandwidth just to try to, not, explode, psychologically. So if I don't establish psychological safety from the get-go, then it's going to be really hard to make that connection, have you care about what's going on, because you're worried about, something else in your life. Or I'm just being an absolute ass and I'm not, right? So again, I think the long-term play is building connection, and there's very good evidence for this, organizational performance and lots of other measures. So anyway, yeah, that's a great question. We could spend an hour on that easily.
Yeah. So Paul, what are the best practices for creating psychological safety virtually? I mean, particularly like we're in situations where we sometimes need to have meaningful conversations with maybe people we've never met before. In particularly, maybe, I don't know if it's different one-on-one or two with a group, but how does one create psychological safety virtually, say with people we don't know well?
Yeah, I think I think we're still figuring that out. We meaning the scientific community or even the training community. But a couple of things, which will not surprise you. The things we do in person, right? So we walk in a room, bunch of new people here, and then we do that. Do you know this person? oh, you work for Accenture? Oh, do you know Bob? Yeah, my friend Bob used to work for them or still works for them. Oh, yeah, okay. So that kind of chit chat, which sounds like it's kind of a weird waste of time on Zoom. How are you? But it builds that sense of connection. So now all of a sudden, instead of being a stranger, we have 1 degree of separation. We know someone in common. And so building that in, what I try to do is to make an emotional connection. So I would say, hey, Sarah, are you okay? You look a little tired today. How are things going? So really opening up that emotional space, which you can do with strangers. If you are authentic and you really mean it, you can just do that. I call emotional check-in. Just do an emotional check-in. And certainly with people you know, it's easier. But I'm maybe old enough or weird enough that I'll just do it with strangers. Like on any kind of Zoom, like, are you okay? You look a little sad today. Something going on. So here's an example. I did an interview about a month ago with a journalist, and she just looked sad to me. And I said, are you all right? Because you look a little bit. I'm just kind of worried about you. And she goes, this pandemic thing. I've been sheltering at home for all these times. I said, do you live by yourself? She said, yeah. I said, tell me about that. And she said, well, don't you want to interview? I said, no, let's work on this first. And she basically said, if I didn't have my cat, I think I would have gone insane. I think it's really hard when you're single and you're not living with anybody. And she was far from her family. And so we had a nice 10-minute conversation about that. And then we established that psychological safety. I think her anxiety went down, just normal life anxiety. That had nothing to do with me. So, that to me was a great investment in having a much better experience for both of us, because she was able to just kind of de-stress a little bit.
Yeah, nice. So Kanush, I see you've got a hand up.
Yes, thank you very much, Alison and Paul. So my background is an MD, so I'm a physician, and I remember from my internship years that I had a patient that we needed to use oxytocin for the induction. So they are going to labor using the hormone oxytocin. So I was just wondering, is it a side effect of too much oxytocin, and do we physiologically have a way to have it in the body, and what are those side effects?
Wonderful question. Thank you so much. Yeah, we've done a lot of work with psychiatric patients to address that issue. So oxytocin is made from 9 very abundant amino acids. So you basically don't run out of the precursors. What we found is that almost any positive social stimulus will cause the brain to release oxytocin. It's got a very short half-life, about 3 minutes. Everyone, including criminal psychopaths that we've tested, and as Alison said in the intro, people living in the rainforest of Papua New Guinea appear to release oxytocin on stimulus. We find that psychopaths, which are about 2% of the population, and people who have faced a lot of trauma, particularly trauma victims as children, is that the receptors become dysfunctional. So oxytocin is really, sorry, maybe too much information, but she and I would just talk. So, you release oxytocin, but it has no effect biologically because the receptors have become damaged or dysfunctional. And so I think the takeaway for all of us is that you're going to get a couple % of the population who are just not going to respond well to you. And some of those people are having a really bad day. So as I said, anxiety, epinephrine, norepinephrine for my neuroscience friends are big inhibitors to oxytocin release. So if I'm really under stress, enormous stress, I'm not going to be able to reach out very effectively. And the second is, the psychopaths. So we've spent, my group has spent time in prisons measuring oxytocin release and behaviors of criminal psychopaths, and they classically lack empathy, right? So, and they have a dysfunction oxytocin, both in the release of oxytocin, but primarily in the receptors. So 2% of the people you're not going to be able to make progress with, and but 98% you can. And so again, for that couple %, who are just having really bad days, I think it is important, at least as a neuroscientist, I think it's important that we don't commit the fundamental attribution error and say, I don't know, Sarah's nasty to me once in a while, and say, oh, she's a bad person, as opposed to, hey, I wonder if she's having a bad day because she's always been really nice to me. And today, this one time, I don't want to jump to that conclusion. I'd rather inquire, hey, are you all right? Are things going okay? You really seem stressed out today. Let's talk about that. Anyway, yeah, so it looks like you can't run out. And here's the last thing. Sorry, such a good question. You guys are so smart. The more you release oxytocin, the more you become sensitized to it. So we actually become more empathic, better connectors over time. And by the way, it won't surprise you. In every experiment we've run in 20 years, thousands of people, who releases more oxytocin on average? Women rather than men.
Yeah. So Paul, we're halfway through our conversation. Do you want to, I wasn't sure how we were going to do this. Do you want to show the data of where we are so far?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
I'll do a screen share
Cool.
and pull it up. I think y'all can see it here. So, so here's the data. It's running in real time. Looks like we've got 7 people who are collecting data. This is rescaling. This spike was our exercise, actually right after our exercise. So I put a marker in here that says exercise over. So yeah, so it looks like that exercise break really worked, allowed us to just have a little reset. This is when, Allison, we started talking. So I started the data collection a little earlier. And yeah, here's where we are now. So when this data collection is over, it'll present a bunch of metrics that identify not only how good it is. So immersion runs 0 to 10, so it's linear. So benchmark is 4, so right around benchmark, which is fine. And it'll also quantify these mountaintops, like what were the peak immersion moments that we call wow. What, you know, so here we are recording this probably. You must be recording this.
Yeah,
we
we
can go
are.
back and yeah, why don't you and I do that, Allison, offline, and we can just go back and see, hey, what were those really high immersion moments? What did people love the most? And then we can look at some of these valleys and go, okay, what sort of didn't work so well? So yeah, any questions on that, you guys? I'm sorry, I'm
no, it's
talking
great.
over everybody.
Yeah, let's ask questions. Let me see if I can.
And thanks for the people who participated, by the way. So hope it's kind of fun. You'll get feedback on your smartwatch, by the way, as soon as it's over. I was play wrestling with my dog today. That's a bandage.
Who won?
I think he did. He did like.
So Bonnie's asking how the feedback is collected. It's from the smartwatch, right?
Yeah. So there's a trick there. This is a 20-year trick, which is we basically had millions of dollars of taxpayer money. We did a lot of this work for the U.S. military and U.S. intelligence community who want to understand how people respond to experiences. And we measured central brain activity of the brain and the peripheral nervous system simultaneously. And then we basically traced out these pathways from the nerves that innervate your heart and your gut, which I can get from here, back to the brain. So then we wrote algorithms that let us infer what the brain's doing from these very subtle changes in the cranial nerve activity. And so, yeah, so it just took a long time. All this is published. If you Google Scholar Me, you can pull up a bunch of papers and see, not the algorithms, but everything else. And then doing it in real time was hard, and cloud computing and blah, 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 blah. So it's going from watch to cloud to the platform that I showed you. But yeah, it just took a long time to figure out all the details.
It's cool though. It's super cool.
Thank you.
So one of the things we talked about in our previous conversation was the impact of storytelling on attention. Will you speak to that?
Gosh, yeah. So we started using, as I said earlier, short videos to see if we could release oxytocin in humans, as opposed to in-person interactions. They're less controlled. And that's how we kind of got onto this notion of neurologic immersion. But as we looked at those videos, they had a narrative arc. I mean, people produce these videos. We pulled them off the web somewhere. And what we found was that storytelling is a very effective way to immerse people in a piece of information. It's almost the most effective way we found. So what does that mean? It means having a narrative arc in which I introduce characters with a mystery. Hey, something's happening here. I generate tension, and it should be authentic tension, not manufactured tension, but real people having a human scale story where real people are having a kind of a tension or crisis, and then have that crisis resolve. And that narrative arc, the immersion will almost track that. Again, not in a straight line, it'll be wiggly. So it's a really effective way to transmit information. And so I feel like the scales fell from my eyes after a couple of years of studying this, that storytelling is really, really effective. Even though as a super nerd, like many of you, I want to have slides and data, I always want to start with a story. So I think that human scale story is what our brains are kind of built to connect to. And in addition, if you tell that story or relate that story effectively, then you're going to get that halo effect where that audience will connect to you as well.
Nice. So not to put you on the spot, but so what's the best story you tell?
Yeah, I think that there's a variety of good stories. Again, you guys can Google me later, and there's a nice animated video of work we've done with St. Jude Children's Hospital about a father who's got a 2-year-old son dying of brain cancer, and it'll make you cry. It's so sad. And these are real people. These are not actors. This is a real kid who died, and I don't tell that story anymore, Allison, because the last time I told it was at a law conference in Los Angeles, and several lawyers actually cried. And you're aware that lawyers don't have souls. So if we made lawyers cry, then the regular humans, really will cry. Also, I think the classic one is the famous challenge that Ernest Hemingway had to tell a story in 6 words. Do you guys know this one?
Yeah.
So the story is for sale, baby shoes never worn. And there's a story arc there, right? So there's a mystery, there's a crisis, there's a resolution. And so, yeah, that's 2 examples.
That's great. So one of the things we'd also talked about previously was what kind of notoriously nosedives attention. And I actually used this. It's funny, after we had this conversation, I was asked to lead a discussion in a coaching group, and the gentleman who brought me in did this, what felt to me like an endless introduction, and then asked me to introduce myself. Oh. And I remembered our conversation, and I'm like, nope, I'm just going to dive in. And so what is it about introductions, Paul?
What another great question. So Accenture found this in their data, that the only person who cares about the introduction is the person speaking. So, and inevitably you get that one dude who's got to go on about his house and his kids and his 14 dogs, and like, oh my God, I just want to get to this thing. So yeah, so what Accenture has done in person now is put a little, that little tent card with your name. Hey, if Allison is interesting, if Luann is interesting, I can talk to them on the break, right? So I think that's a much more effective use of that time. So I'm with you, short introduction, let's get to it. And secondly, which we found in our work with entertainment clients, what we call what they call in Hollywood a hot open hot, right? Get me in there. Don't go, well, it's nice to be here and I've traveled all. No, get me excited. So again, think of the great TED Talks. They start out really strong, and so we did research on TED Talks just for fun. Not mine, because it would be too self-aggrandizing, but we had people, we went online and found a list of the best and worst TED Talks, and we actually measured immersion while people gave them, and we showed that if you could increase immersion by 10% in a TED Talk, at least for the sample of data we have, you'd have 176,000 more online views. So really, get me immersed, but also many of those TED Talks that are great open hot. They open with a real mystery. They open with energy. So something I like to do in person is, when I go on stage, is to run from the wings, run on stage. Let's get that energy up right away, right? So I want them to know I'm excited about being there. I'm not going to stroll out. And it helps me burn off a little of that anxiety or whatever before you go talk. So I don't know how to do that on Zoom. I can't run in from the wings on Zoom, but I don't know, put some energy into it, I think.
Yeah, I love that. So other than long introductions, what else kind of tends to nosedive connection or attention, and besides going on too long and introducing yourself?
Yeah, I think many things. One is staticness. So the attentional dopamine response in the brain loves the new thing. Hate to tell you. So sitting here, and I'm sitting, you guys are mostly sitting. Like, it's better if I'm standing. I should be standing, but I'm not, because I'm super tall and you can't use camera to see my ceiling. Changing things up. So as I said, changing the media, changing the experience, taking questions. I've sometimes brought I have little squishy brains from our thing. And if you ask a question, I'll throw you a squishy brain. So now someone like, what the hell? This guy's on stage throwing brains out in the audience. And so, anything to change the pace, I think, is good, but also not going on too long, like I am on every possible question you ask me. allowing people to respond. I think having that change. So think of mixing it up. I think that's the key.
So one of the things that I've noticed you're really gracious about, Paul, is like saying that's a great question and you guys are brilliant. I'm curious, and I'm sure that's really sweet, but like, is that based on data too?
Just based on my own stupid personality, probably.
Okay, I'm just like, well, is Colin the audience really smart? Does that increase, oxytocin? I'm just curious. Okay, Terry, question.
Thanks, Allison. I actually was fortunate to be in the breakout with Paul. So, and we were starting a conversation that I didn't get to hear his answer to. So thought maybe I'd ask it in a larger group. In working with clients, sometimes, in certain situations, you're realizing that they have these really groove neural pathways, right? Where they just have a way they see the world and the way that it is. And you're trying to work with them to expand to more options so that they can see other alternatives for how they could approach a problem or a situation. I'm just curious for Paul's thoughts on that and what the research might show.
Yeah, so nice to be able to have a one-on-one in the breakout room. So thanks, Terry, for a great conversation. So the sort of bad news for everybody is the brain is a super lazy organ, in the sense that it takes so much energy to run, about 20% of your caloric intake, that your brain really wants to idle, just doesn't want to expend energy. So that's why the hot open is important. That's why getting, bouncing people out of their homeostasis is important. So Terry's question is, can we actually change these pathways in the brain, change behaviors? And the answer is it's hard, because your brain kind of optimizes those pathways in the brain. So they're really, really efficient once the term art is potentiated. Once those pathways have been potentiated, they really want to activate. So these manifest as habits. So here's a second practical thing you do. So tonight, when your dear loving spouse or roommate complains about something you do, and you say, they say to you, honey, I told you 100 times not to leave your dirty dishes in the sink. And you say, oh, sweet person that I love, I would love to change this behavior, but my lazy, lazy brain has gotten used to the 45 years of my life putting my dirty dishes in the sink as opposed to the dishwasher. So how do you change that? And it's exactly what Terry's job is, and also your jobs, which is coaching. So you need to coach this person. So it's constant reminders. So the data look like at least 90 days of practice on this new skill or behavior with feedback, right? The feedback part's important. That's where your jobs are really critical, in my view. You've got to give that person feedback, so they're giving this constant reinforcement. So at home, you tell your spouse or your roommate, for 90 days, you got to remind me, just be my kind of nag me nicely, so I do this new thing, and then I can help establish new pathways in the brain, and then those will become default. So I think this is where coaching is really, really important, is to move you from this kind of maladaptive set of defaults that you had into this new default, which is going to be better, that will better serve you.
Cool, thank you. So I see your hand, Roger, go ahead.
Sorry, Paul, a quick question. Are there any examples of TED speakers that you would say, here's a wonderful example of somebody who quickly got to the heart of what they're talking about and then connected with what people may be interested in that subject? I learn by example. Personally.
Yeah. I know a couple if you don't.
Go ahead, Allison. I have a couple, but you go.
Jill Bolte Taylor, OMG. She, I am a longtime TEDx conference organizer, and I've coached hundreds of TED speakers, not hundreds, dozens of TED speakers. And that's one of the ones I point to. What would you say, Paul?
I can just tell you the ones that, first of all, I go to TED regularly too, and I'm terrible because I critique everybody. But can you believe it? So first of all, Roger, don't bury the lead, right? So hit me hard with the big mystery, just like you would do in storytelling. I'm not really a fan of this guy, though a lot of people are. Tony Robbins has an amazing TED Talk, and he's the one person I've ever seen who Chris Henderson let go longer than 18 minutes. And I think he did it on purpose. He set up a really big crisis, and then his clock ran out, and then Chris hey, time's up, and he goes, well, does the audience want to know how this ends? That's a heck of a hook, right? Think about that. So But Roger's question was sort of starting, really hot. So I can't think of one off the top of my head. Sorry.
Well, yeah, so one of my favorites, and I have that, so is gave his talk on my TED stage. It was Simon Sinek. I organized the TEDx Puget Sound, which he spoke at, and so it's one of the top. I think he's the number 4 TED Talk of all time. And so that's what was attracted me to him when I looked at him as a speaker to put on the docket, and he does not fail to deliver.
Thank you.
Kate Peters, would you be open to speaking about your comment? One of the things that questions that we've gotten is like, how do I create a virtual experience that's as much like an in-person experience as possible? And Kate, it sounds like you've had a good experience there. Will you speak to that?
Okay, yeah, sure, happy to. I love hearing this, Paul. This is just what we just did. We broke it up into, we did a 4-session coaching on communications. And there were 2 facilitators, both in my company. And we broke it up into really 10 to 15 minute segments. And we did games, we did polling, they created a word cloud as part of a game. And, we went through all the typical material that we do. And we're both performers originally. So we're used to being in front of a group and, kind of making it lots of fun. And so it wasn't working online. So we did a lot of research and said, okay, break it up. Let's do that. And we got the best results we ever have. People wanted more. They responded beautifully. And I think they learned more than they did in the in-person sessions. So I'm totally a fan of all of this. It works.
Well done, Kate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Paul, any final comments here at the end of our conversation?
Yeah, I think Kate's got it nailed. I think it is kind of edutainment. It's got to be entertaining. It's got to have a story. You've got to give me a reason to care, because my lazy brain just wants to idle, and really have authentic emotion, right? So you as a presenter can share those probably amazing stories you all have of working with executives or whomever, in which you really did a life-changing experience. So I think starting with that story is still very, very valuable.
Nice. Well, that was terrific, Paul. We're just going to close by saying, if you'd like more information about Paul, you can find out more about him at these locations. He just I noticed a link to his blog on TED Talks, which is awesome. So check that out, and check out his TED Talk too. It's really pretty great.